Well, there have been extraordinary scenes in Berlin tonight as thousands of people gathered to hear Barack Obama deliver key foreign policy speech on his current European tour. The Democratic presidential hopeful laid out his vision for America's place in the new world order, saying he was speaking as a proud citizen of the world, of the world, of the world.
It is a big idea. It is a big idea. A new world order.
Hello friends, I am the Anti-Terrorist. Thank you for all of your emails and your messages of support, and for staying part of the conversation. Now this broadcast may be old news to many of my subscribers, and it may even appear trite considering what's going on in Japan at the moment. Not to mention the UN-backed program of regime change and destabilization going on in the Middle East. But I thought I would attempt to make the information more accessible, and perhaps bring it a little closer to home. Now, how often have you heard someone say,
"Why, America's the wealthiest nation in the whole world"?
Well, surely, if America was the richest nation in the world, it wouldn't have a national debt, would it? Surely it would have a positive balance of payments, an agricultural surplus, and it would produce more than it consumes. It would have a money with real value, 100% of its face value. Oh, and the freest nation on earth? Freedom doesn't come from debt. Freedom comes from wealth. Jim was a real estate broker who had 35 salesmen working under him. He lived in a nice big house, and he had 3 Rolls Royces. He was a pretty successful guy. Now, 1 month before they repossessed his cars, he was still driving all 3 of them. 29 days before they repossessed them, he was still driving all 3. In fact, up until the day they actually took them, up until the day they actually took the keys to his house and evicted him, he had all the appearances of wealth, although he wasn't actually making his payments and was in the process of foreclosure. The United States of America still has all the trappings of wealth, even though they are, right now as I speak, going through the process of foreclosure. Nations around the world are waking up to the fact that the United States dollar doesn't have a value corresponding to the numerals on the face of it. And they're also beginning to see the US doesn't have a positive balance of payments, and that its national debt and the combined personal debts in the country amount to more than it can pay. And I'm not just talking about the payments. I'm telling you it can't even service the interest. The rest of the people in the world, those who can count, the leaders of China, Japan, South Korea, Germany, and so on, well, they're taking a look at their position and they can see they're not going to get paid. And at some point in time, I think they're going to cut off the US credit. Assuming they've got any brains at all, they will. However, if the US can continue to con these people into giving them more and more actual property, and take worthless promises to pay in the form of paper as payment, then the US can continue to profit at their expense and ignorance. Historically, it would be a first, though, as with Jim the broker, there comes a point in time when it becomes painfully obvious that this guy's business model can't support the debt, and they have to foreclose and take the collateral. The simple truth is we're all in pretty bad shape. I liken it to bicycle racing at the velodrome. The US is just ahead of the pack, but he's been there for a while now. He's spent all of his resources, and one by one his teammates have fallen by the wayside. He's looking around for someone he trusts to hold the lead for a bit, but the Chinese rider pretends not to see him. He knows he's probably going to be the guy that's going to run out of steam or make a rookie error and take a serious tumble, but he can't help himself. He attempts another sprint. His calf muscle twangs, and before he knows what's happened, he's chewing carbon fiber and shedding a few layers of epidermis. The problem is that we're all in his slipstream, trying to keep pace with him. So when he goes down, he causes a pile-up and we all go down with him. FUBAR'd by the Federal Reserve and the IMF. The intense focus on the Federal Reserve System in the US over the past few years has actually been a real education for us Brits. It exemplifies the typical historical devolution or corruption of monetary systems throughout the world in the past 2 centuries, from commodity money to fiduciary money and then finally to fiat money. In fact, the out-and-out scandalous behavior on part of the bankers in the US has begun to awaken not only the Americans themselves, but also people all over the world. We're beginning to ask questions about money, what it really is, what it should be, and what it's worth.
Hey, how come the Federal Reserve isn't audited? We need an audit of the Federal Reserve, man.
Well, that's the brouhaha at the moment, isn't it? Now, the Federal Reserve is an eleemosynary trust. It's a religious corporation. There's never been an audit of the Federal Reserve, and there isn't going to be one, because it's specifically prohibited in the terms and conditions of its charter, in the same way that the government put a rider on the bill prohibiting you from suing Pfizer or Merck, or any other pharmaceutical manufacturer, should you receive a vaccine that causes you harm. They're specifically exempted from suit. And why the hell is the Federal Reserve specifically exempted from audit? Well, because it's a criminal enterprise, like the mafia, and they don't want their criminal enterprise audited. Now, you might say,
But the Federal Reserve and the Bank of England are really bad and they should be abolished.
well, I agree with you, philosophically. But as a matter of law, you're not going to abolish these two institutions. They're part and parcel with the government, which is also a criminal enterprise. Now, most of us think of the paper in our pockets or the digits in our bank account as money. And because we're all living hectic lives, sometimes juggling 2 and 3 jobs just to make ends meet, we don't have the time or wherewithal to stop and question what it is we're actually working for. No one seems to consider the fact that we no longer dictate what our time, effort, and energy is worth. I mean, think about that for a second. As a labourer, for instance, you might consider you're worth about £20 per hour. But if the banks can inflate and deflate currency on a whim, and therefore decide what the pound or the dollar is worth, aren't they, in fact, the ones who decide what your labour is worth? How did that happen? First of all, let's take a look at the definitions of various forms of money to get a sense of where we've been and where we are. First, we have commodity money, which is essentially gold and silver coin. Commodity money came into circulation by labour of the people who made it in what was called a commodity economy. Money that's worth as much as the things that you're trading it for. You might take that 1-ounce coin and trade it for a horse or a cow. And the guy who gave you the horse and cow for it might in turn trade it for something else. You can't inflate it. You've either got it or you haven't. But you might deposit it in the bank, and then someone else might borrow it and use it in their business. Then they would return it to the bank where they pay some interest on it. Now, for argument's sake, let's suppose that too many people mined too much gold, and there was so much gold floating around in the economy that people just didn't know what to do with it. Well, that would be inflation. But gold has a value often by itself, as a commodity for jewellery or some other purpose. So it never worked to inflate the economy because someone would divert it and use it for something else. Now, fiduciary money is paper backed by gold or silver. A unit of fiduciary money, typically a bank or a government treasury note, depends on the ability or the compliance of the issuer to redeem on the full value of the note. And there's always a temptation for issuers to renege on their promises to redeem, though, which is why fiduciary money always threatens to become fraudulent money. Now, the possibility of fraud is related to the modern fractional reserve banking system. Under the fractional reserve system, the bank always issues more units of fiduciary money, supposedly payable on demand, than it has units of commodity money, gold or silver, in the vault available for redemption. The bank is counting on the unlikely event that the majority of its customers will never want to redeem their notes at the same time. It's a lot like how most health clubs work. They always take on as many memberships as they can because they know that the members won't all show up at once. Or the airlines. They almost always overbook seats on flights, betting that at least a couple of passengers won't show up on time to catch the flight. Modern fractional reserve banking is essentially fraudulent because the bank simply can't simultaneously fulfill all of its promises to redeem its outstanding notes on demand. In other words, a run on the bank. So the bank's promises to pay are false. And then we have fiat money, such as our current Bank of England or Federal Reserve notes. Fiat money isn't redeemable in gold or silver or fiduciary money, and because it costs next to nothing to produce, the banks can print as much of it as they like whilst massaging monetary policy and interest rates. It's the main way the government operates a scheme of dictatorial hidden taxation, through increases in the money supply that generate a rise in the price of goods and services. If you have a Federal Reserve or a Bank of England note, you don't have any right to demand that the banks or the Treasury redeem those notes for any amount of any commodity. The most you can do with that fiat note is change it for another fiat note, or demand that your government receive it in payment for your tax liabilities. If we rub our brain cells together and apply a little logic, fiat notes are really just tax anticipation coupons disguised as money, aren't they? It's a license to steal, from an ignorant public. The banking system makes money in the process of circulating paper. And once you create a piece of paper and you put it into circulation, you can charge a fee. And there are fees associated with changing and exchanging paper. So the more paper you have in circulation, the more fees you can charge, and the bigger the bonus you can give yourself at the end of the year.
How do the people in America who are having their currency debased because of the stealing that's going on by Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan by using high-frequency trading on the floor of the exchange, how come they are not participating in this? They're getting penalized by this. They're victims of this.
Yes. I just don't think that the stealing is necessarily the right verb for this. It's something else. Stealing involves that there is some kind of physical commodity that's being stolen. That the currency is being debased implies that if we didn't do this, the currency would be solvent. And the whole problem here is that the currency itself is disconnected from any kind of physical value. It exists as a debt against future production, rather than a store of value. And all of this comes back to the immaterial basis that we're now living in. So yes, in a sense you could say that they're stealing. In a greater sense, they're not really stealing because there's nothing to be stolen.
Right. So the people who are victimized by this, they should take solace in the fact that when it all started, they weren't worth anything to begin with.
Basically, yes. I know that sounds terribly perverse. The reality is that this is an unsustainable system, and that the inevitability of its collapse has been there almost from the beginning, because the entire system is based on a currency that is not based on anything. It exists only in relation to other currencies. It itself is semiotic.
The purpose of money is to exchange property. It's not to make more money out of the money. That's the definition of a Ponzi scheme. And that's where we're at today. And of course, the reason we believe in the monetary system today is because the very same bankers robbing us blind also educated us. Talk about the best of both worlds. And first they educate their customers and then sell their customers this dodgy bill of goods. And we, the customers, love it. Fiat money has deceived everyone in the world, and everyone in the world practices it, but you won't find one person in 100, probably not even 1 in 1,000 that can tell you how this system works. So let me show you how this program pans out. Here's a little story that really illustrates the point. Now, there are 5 chaps on a desert island, and they've divided up the island between them. One has the pineapples, one has the papayas, one has the bananas, one has the fish, and the last chap is a banker. And the banker is a parasite. He's got land, but he doesn't want to work. So one night, the 4 fellas are sitting around the campfire with the banker, and they're discussing the fact that they miss recreation and entertainment.
Oh man, what I wouldn't give for a game of poker right now. Well boys, your lucky day is here because I just happen to have a deck of cards. Well, what are we waiting for? Let's play! Whoa, not so fast there, fellas. I've got the only deck of cards here on this island, and I'm entitled to be paid for the use of my cards. But we haven't got any money to pay you. What do you want? What does he want? Well, I'm going to divide the cards up into 4 piles, and I'll lend 13 cards to each of you. Now, when you're done playing cards, some of you are going to have more cards than others. But I want each of you to pay me 1 extra card. That's 13 cards plus 1 from each of you. Only 1 card each? Come on, fellas. That's nothing. Let's play. Now, as a guarantee that you're going to pay me this 1 extra card, I want you, Tom, to pledge me your banana trees. I want you, Bill, to pledge me your papaya trees. And I want you, John, to pledge me your fishing rod. And I want you, Jim, to pledge me your pineapples.
So the deal is made. The cards are passed out and the chaps play. Hey, which is better? 2 red aces or 2 black aces?
Aw, come on, man. These cards suck. All I got is a toilet flush.
Several rounds are played and tricks are won here and there, and pretty soon, when they're all done, the cards are counted. And the first guy's played well and he's got 20. So he turns to the banker and gives him 14 cards. The second guy ends up with just 14 cards, so he hands them straight over to the banker. The third guy also has 14 cards, so he also hands them all to the banker. However, the 4th player only has 4 cards, he can't pay back the 13 plus 1. So the banker takes his 4 cards and his pineapple plantation on the island. In other words, he forecloses on the collateral. Now, it could be that one of the players will end up with far more, and the other 3 players will end up not being able to pay off. But in any event, it doesn't make any difference whether it's 1 or 3. One of them will always win, and one of them will always lose. And the banker will always take the collateral.